The bathroom faucet had been dripping for 3 weeks. Not the kind of drip that drives you insane immediately, more like the Chinese water torture variety that slowly chips away at your sanity until you find yourself lying awake at 2 a.m, counting each metallic ping against the porcelain. Yet, I'm Bennett Crawford, 42 years old, mechanical engineer by trade, and apparently the only person in this house who notices when things break. My wife Vivian had mentioned it exactly once, in that passive-aggressive way she'd perfected over our 18 years of marriage. That faucet's making noise again. Not, can you fix it? Or should we call a plumber? Just a statement of fact delivered like a weather report, leaving me to decode whether action was expected or if she was simply documenting the decline of our suburban kingdom. So there I was, sprawled under the sink with my toolbox, listening to Vivian's muffled voice drifting through the bedroom wall. She was on another one of her late-night calls, probably work, since her law firm seemed to operate on vampire hours. The pipes groaned as I adjusted the wrench, and her laughter bubbled through the drywall. That laugh stopped me cold. I'd been married to this woman for nearly 2 decades. I knew her professional laugh, crisp, measured, appropriate. I knew her social laugh, bright but calculated, designed to charm clients at firm parties. I even knew her genuine laugh, though I hadn't heard that one in years. This was something else entirely. This was girlish, flirtatious. The kind of laugh that belonged to someone half her age, someone without mortgage payments, and a 17-year-old daughter who rolled her eyes at everything. "Oh, Michelle loves that place," she said, her voice carrying that same unfamiliar lilt. Michelle's never been there, but she's been eager to try it. Michelle? I knew every person in Vivian's orbit. Colleagues, clients, the women from her yoga studio. There was no Michelle, and why was she talking about herself in third person? The wrench slipped, barking my knuckles against the pipe. I bit back a curse and strained to hear more, but her voice had dropped to a whisper. Then silence. The conversation was over. I finished the repair in a fog of confusion, my mind turning over that strange laugh, that unfamiliar name. When I emerged from the bathroom, Vivian was already in bed, her phone face down on the nightstand, her back turned toward her side of the mattress. "Faucet's fixed," I announced to the darkness. She murmured without turning over. "Thanks." No mention of the call. No explanation for Michelle. Just another night in the Crawford household where conversations died before they began and mysteries multiplied like dust bunnies under the bed. The next morning followed our usual script. Vivian emerged from the bedroom at precisely 6:15, already dressed in her armor of choice. A charcoal power suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that severe bun that made her look like she could litigate the devil into submission. She moved through the kitchen with military precision. Coffee, toast, a glance at her phone that lasted exactly 30 seconds. "Late meeting tonight," she announced without looking up. "Don't wait up." "Which client?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be vague. "The Morrison case. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. The Morrison case had supposedly been wrapped up months ago, but Vivian's late meetings had become as regular as the sunrise. Every Wednesday like clockwork, sometimes Thursdays too. Once, memorably, a weekend emergency that kept her out until Sunday afternoon. She grabbed her purse, a sleek leather thing that cost more than my first car, and headed for the garage. That's when I saw it. A second strap peeking out from the main compartment. Not her usual phone case. This one was different. Smaller. Cheaper. The garage door rumbled shut, and I stood there in my kitchen, coffee growing cold in my hand, staring at the space where my wife had been. 18 years of marriage, and suddenly I felt like I was living with a stranger. The day crawled by with the speed of continental drift. I sat through meetings about structural load calculations and steel beam specifications, but my mind kept wandering back to that laugh, that name, that second phone strap. By 5 o'clock, I was practically vibrating with nervous energy. I got home before Vivian, a rare occurrence these days, and found myself pacing the living room like a caged animal. Our house felt different somehow, like a movie set where the furniture was real, but the life was fake. The family photos on the mantel seemed to mock me. Bennett, Vivian, and Casey at last year's beach vacation, all smiles and forced togetherness. Had we been pretending even then? Vivian's gym bag sat by the laundry room door, forgotten in her morning rush. She'd been religious about her Wednesday evening yoga classes lately, part of her wellness journey, she called it. The bag was expensive, of course, black leather with silver hardware that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that even as my hand reached for the zipper. Whatever I found in there would change things, and some part of me, the part that still believed in the fairy tale of our marriage, wanted to stay ignorant. But the other part, The part that had been listening to mysterious phone calls and cataloging lies needed to know. The bag contained the usual suspects: yoga mat, water bottle, a change of clothes that still had tags on them. And there, nestled between a pair of pristine athletic shoes that had never seen a gym floor, was a phone I'd never seen before. It was buzzing. My hands shook as I pulled it out. The screen showed a text notification from someone named Brad Lawyer 92. The preview was enough to make my stomach drop. "Can't wait to see Michelle tonight. That thing you did last week was..." The message cut off, but I'd seen enough. My wife, the woman who'd shared my bed for 18 years, who'd given birth to my daughter, who'd stood beside me at my father's funeral, was living a double life. And in that life, she wasn't Vivian Crawford, suburban lawyer and mother. She was Michelle, single Michelle, childless Michelle, Michelle who did things that made Brad Lawyer 92 send messages that couldn't be finished in a preview window. I photographed the phone from every angle, memorizing its case, its position in the bag. Then I did something that would have horrified the man I'd been 24 hours earlier. I unlocked it. The password was our anniversary date. Even in betrayal, Vivian couldn't resist a little irony. What I found inside that phone rewrote the story of my marriage. Dating profiles where Michelle, 35 and living her best single life, smiled at the camera with a freedom I hadn't seen in Vivian's face for years. Text conversations that spanned months, filled with plans and promises and intimate details that made my hands shake. Credit card statements for accounts I'd never seen, funding hotel rooms and dinners and weekend trips that had never appeared on our family calendar. Michelle had been busy. Michelle had been having the time of her life. And Michelle, according to every profile and conversation, had never been married and definitely didn't have kids. I spent 47 minutes documenting everything. Screenshots of conversations, photos of receipts, copies of profile information. The evidence painted a picture so detailed and damning that even Vivian's legal training wouldn't be able to argue around it. Then I carefully returned the phone to its exact position in the bag and zipped everything up. By the time Vivian came home at 11:30, smelling like wine and lies, I was sitting in my chair with a book I hadn't read a word of. "How was yoga?" I asked, not looking up from the page. "Fine," she said, already heading for the stairs. "I'm exhausted, going straight to bed." "Sweet dreams," I called after her. "Hope Michelle has a good night, too." She froze on the third step, her hand gripping the banister. For a moment, the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. "What did you say?" I said, "I hope you have a good night. Long day tomorrow, right?" She stood there for another heartbeat, then continued up the stairs. But I'd seen her shoulders tense, seen the way her step faltered. Michelle's secret was starting to crack. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close, then pulled out my own phone and dialed the number I'd memorized from her contacts. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice cautious and unfamiliar. "Hello?" "Hi, Michelle," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "This is your husband. We need to talk about the divorce." The line went silent except for the sound of her breathing. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, she whispered, "Bennett?" "That's right. And tomorrow, Michelle, you're going to find out what happens when your two worlds collide." I hung up and sat back in my chair, finally feeling like I could breathe again. The faucet had stopped dripping, the mystery was solved, and Michelle's perfect single life was about to get very complicated. Sleep didn't come that night. I lay in bed listening to Vivian toss and turn, her breathing irregular and anxious. Every few minutes, she'd shift position, and I could feel the tension radiating from her side of the mattress, like heat from a furnace. Around 3 a.m, I heard her slip out of bed and pad downstairs. The soft glow of her phone screen would have been visible from space. By morning, she looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. Her usual armor of makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she poured her coffee. She kept glancing at her purse, where Michelle's phone waited like a ticking bomb. "You okay?" I asked, injecting just enough concern into my voice to sound genuine. "You look tired." "Just work stress," she replied, but her voice cracked on the last word. "The Morrison case is more complicated than we thought." "Funny," I said, buttering my toast with deliberate slowness. "I could have sworn that case was closed months ago." Her coffee mug hit the counter harder than necessary. "Cases reopen, Bennett. Legal issues are complex. You wouldn't understand." There it was, the condescension that had been growing stronger over the years. The subtle implication that my engineering degree from State wasn't quite as impressive as her law degree from Georgetown, that my blue-collar roots would always make me the junior partner in our marriage. "You're right," I said mildly. "I'm just a simple engineer. I only understand facts and evidence. Legal complexity is way above my pay grade." She shot me a sharp look, but I was already standing, grabbing my keys from the hook by the door. Have a good day, honey. Try not to work too late tonight. Michelle needs her beauty sleep. I was out the door before she could respond, but I caught a glimpse of her face in the reflection of the window, pale, shocked, and finally genuinely afraid. My first stop was Nate's Gym, a converted warehouse on the wrong side of town where the equipment was ancient but functional, and the clientele included more ex-cops and retired military than soccer moms. Nate Kowalski had been my best friend since high school, back when we were both stupid enough to think we'd conquer the world with our bare hands. He'd done 20 years as a detective before opening the gym, and his instincts were still sharp enough to cut glass. "You look like hell," he said when I walked in, not bothering with pleasantries. "What's eating you?" I told him everything: the phone call, the discovery, the evidence I'd gathered. Nate listened without interruption, his weathered face growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, absently wrapping his hands with tape, even though he wasn't planning to hit anything. "How long you think this has been going on?" he asked finally. "Based on the messages? At least 8 months, maybe longer. And you're sure about the evidence? No chance you misunderstood something?" I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshots. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline as he scrolled through Michelle's dating profile, her conversations with Brad Lawyer 92 and at least 6 other men, her detailed accounts of hotel meetings and weekend getaways. "Jesus," he muttered. "She's been busy. You recognize any of these guys?" Brad's got to be Brandon Hartley. He's a partner at Morrison, Klein & Associates, ironically the firm she's supposedly been working late with. The others? I shrugged. Michelle's been casting a wide net. "What's your next move?" That was the question I'd been wrestling with all morning. The old Bennett, the one who still believed in marriage counseling and working things out, wanted to confront Vivian directly, to give her a chance to explain, to salvage something from the wreckage. But that Bennett had never seen his wife's face light up while talking to another man, had never read months of messages detailing intimate encounters that made their own bedroom seem like a morgue by comparison, had never discovered that the woman he'd loved for 18 years had been systematically erasing him from her fantasy life. "I want her to understand what she's lost," I said finally. "Not just the marriage, but the consequences. Her reputation, her career, her comfortable little world where she gets to play Michelle on the side while I pay the mortgage." Nate nodded slowly. "Revenge is a dish best served cold, but it's also a dish that can poison the cook. You sure you want to go down this road?" She made the choice when she bought that second phone. I'm just making sure she lives with it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of planning and preparation. I made copies of everything, storing them in multiple locations. I researched Brandon Hartley and discovered he was married to a woman named Lila who ran a successful lifestyle blog. I found Michelle's Instagram account, separate from Vivian's professional profile, where she documented her single girl adventures with carefully cropped photos that eliminated any evidence of family life. The most damning discovery came when I cross-referenced Michelle's credit card statements with Vivian's supposed work schedule. Every late meeting corresponded to a hotel charge. Every weekend conference matched up with a romantic getaway. The woman was methodical in her deception. I had to give her that. By evening, I was ready for phase 2 of Michelle's education. Vivian came home at her usual Wednesday time, 11:30, smelling like wine and guilt. But tonight, something was different. She moved through the house like she was walking through a minefield, her eyes darting to corners and shadows as if expecting me to jump out with accusations. "How was yoga?" I asked, the same question as always. "It was fine." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Funny thing," I said, closing my book and looking at her directly. "I called Golden Lotus Studio today, asked about their Wednesday evening classes." Her face went white. "Why would you do that?" "Because I was thinking of joining. You know, couples yoga. Thought it might be good for us." I smiled, letting the lie hang in the air between us. Turns out they don't have Wednesday evening classes. Haven't for over a year. Budget cuts. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air. There are multiple studios. You must have called the wrong one?" Namaste Yoga on 5th Street, Zen Garden on Maple Avenue, Sacred Space downtown. I ticked them off on my fingers. Called them all. Amazing how none of them have ever heard of Vivian Crawford. The silence stretched between us like a wire under tension. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, the same gesture she used in court when she was about to deliver a closing argument. "I don't have to explain my schedule to you, Bennett. If you don't trust me..." "Trust?" I laughed, and the sound was harsh enough to make her flinch. Trust is an interesting word coming from someone who's been lying to me for months. I haven't been lying. Michelle has. The name hit her like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward, one hand reaching for the wall to steady herself. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Michelle, 35, single, no kids, living her best life. Michelle who loves sushi and hates romantic comedies. Michelle who's never been married but is always up for adventure. I stood up, pulling out my phone. Michelle, who's been very busy lately. I showed her the screenshots. Her own words, her own photos, her own lies laid out in digital black and white. She stared at the screen like it was showing her own obituary. Where did you get these? Does it matter? The question isn't how I found out, Vivian. The question is how long you thought you could keep this up. She sank into the chair across from me, her perfect composure finally cracking. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? You were going to live a double life forever? Keep Michelle and Vivian in separate boxes until one of us just disappeared? You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Explain how 18 years of marriage turned into a part-time hobby. Explain how our daughter became something to hide from your online boyfriends. Explain how I became so invisible that Michelle could pretend I never existed. Tears were streaming down her face now, smearing her carefully applied makeup. But I felt nothing. No sympathy, no urge to comfort her. The woman crying in my living room was a stranger who happened to look like my wife. I felt trapped, she whispered, like I was disappearing. Michelle was supposed to be freedom, just for a little while. Freedom. I tested the word like I was learning a new language. Is that what you call it when you're in a hotel room with Brandon Hartley? Freedom? Her head snapped up. How do you know about Brandon? Michelle's not very discreet. Neither is he, apparently. Does his wife Lila know about his Wednesday night yoga sessions? The color drained from her face completely. Bennett, please. Please what? Please pretend this never happened. Please let Michelle keep playing her games while Vivian comes home to her boring husband and her inconvenient daughter. I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the whole conversation. Here's what's going to happen, Vivian. Tomorrow you're going to call your lawyer, not Brandon, a different lawyer, and we're going to discuss how to divide 18 years of marriage. Michelle's fun is over. Time for Vivian to face the consequences. I headed for the stairs, leaving her sobbing in the chair. At the landing, I turned back. Oh, and Vivian? Next time you create a fake identity, don't use our anniversary as the password. Even a simple engineer can figure that one out. The next morning brought the first real surprise in this whole sordid mess. Vivian was gone. Her side of the closet had been ransacked. Essential items missing, but most of her wardrobe left behind. The bathroom counter was cleared of her expensive skincare products, but her prescription bottles remained. It was the kind of hasty departure that suggested panic rather than planning. She'd left a note on the kitchen counter, her lawyer's handwriting reduced to a barely legible scrawl. Staying at Monica's. Need time to think. We'll talk when I'm ready. Monica Reeves was Vivian's best friend from law school, now working as a paralegal at a downtown firm. She was one of those women who collected other people's secrets like vintage handbags, always ready to offer a sympathetic ear and a bottle of wine to anyone willing to spill their personal drama. If Vivian was looking for an ally in her war against reality, Monica was the perfect choice. I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. If Vivian thought disappearing would buy her time to craft a narrative that cast her as the victim, she was about to learn how wrong she could be. My daughter Casey chose that moment to stumble into the kitchen, 17 years old and radiating the kind of righteous indignation that only teenagers could muster before their first cup of coffee. Where's Mom? She demanded, as if I'd personally hidden Vivian in the garage. She's staying at Monica's for a few days. Why? The question hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. Casey had Vivian's sharp green eyes and my stubborn jawline, a combination that had served her well in high school debates, but made family discussions feel like legal proceedings. Your mother and I are having some problems, I said carefully. Adult problems. What kind of problems? The kind that adults handle privately, she snorted, a sound that perfectly captured her generation's disdain for authority. Right, because you two are so mature about everything else.
That was weird.
There was truth in that accusation. Vivian and I had been modeling dysfunction for years, thinking we were protecting Casey from our problems when we were actually teaching her that marriage was supposed to be cold and distant, that love was something you performed rather than felt. Your mother made some choices, I said finally. Choices that affect our family. We're trying to figure out how to move forward. What choices? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a young woman who deserved better than the example we'd been setting. She deserved honesty, even if it was painful. She's been seeing someone else for months. Casey's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, denial, anger, and finally something that looked like relief. "I knew something was wrong," she said quietly. "She's been different. Happier, but also sneakier. Like she had this secret that made her feel superior to everyone else. You noticed that? I'm 17, not blind. Mom's been acting like she won some prize the rest of us didn't know about." Casey poured herself coffee with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been self-sufficient for years. "So what happens now? Now we figure out how to be a family without her lies. Are you getting divorced?" The word hung between us like a blade. "Probably." She nodded, processing this information with the pragmatism that had always impressed me about her generation. "Good. You guys have been miserable for years. At least now we know why." The conversation was interrupted by the buzzing of my phone, a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. This is Monica." I showed the message to Casey, who rolled her eyes. "Aunt Monica to the rescue. Let me guess. Mom's the victim in this story, and you're the evil husband who doesn't understand her needs. Something like that? Want some advice from someone who's watched this train wreck for 17 years? I nodded. "Don't let them rewrite history. Mom made her choices. Make her own them." Smart kid. Smarter than her parents, apparently. I met Monica at a coffee shop downtown, the kind of place where lawyers and real estate agents conducted business over overpriced lattes and artisanal pastries. She was already there when I arrived, her red hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, her expression set in what I recognized as her professional sympathy face. "Bennett," she said, rising to give me a hug that felt like a political maneuver. "I'm so sorry about all this." "Are you?" She blinked, clearly not expecting directness. "Of course I am. This is a tragedy for everyone involved. Especially for Vivian, I imagine. She's devastated. Absolutely devastated. She never meant for things to go this far." I sat down across from her, studying her face. Monica had always been a skilled performer, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt that made me wonder how much she really knew about Michelle's adventures. How far did she mean for them to go? It started innocently, just online flirtation, a way to feel attractive again. You have to understand, Bennett. Marriage can be suffocating for some people, especially creative, intelligent women like Vivian. Creative? I tested the word like it might explode. Oheno, is that what we're calling adultery now? It wasn't supposed to be adultery. It was supposed to be fantasy, a harmless escape from the routine of domestic life. Harmless. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to one of Michelle's more explicit conversations with Brandon. "Would you call this harmless?" Monica's face flushed as she read. "Where did you get this?" Michelle wasn't as careful as she thought. The question is, how long have you known about her double life? Vivian mentioned she was feeling trapped, that she needed an outlet. And you encouraged her to create a fake identity and start dating other men? I encouraged her to find herself again, to remember who she was before marriage and motherhood consumed her identity. The righteous indignation in her voice was almost impressive. Monica had managed to convince herself that she was some kind of feminist hero, liberating her friend from the oppression of suburban marriage. The fact that this liberation involved systematic deception and emotional destruction was apparently beside the point. Did you know about the hotels, the credit cards, the fact that she was telling these men she'd never been married? Monica's silence was answer enough. You did know. You helped her, didn't you? Covered for her, maybe even gave her advice on how to manage her double life. Vivian needed support. Vivian needed therapy. What she got was an enabler who helped her lie to her family for months. I leaned forward, letting my anger show for the first time. Here's what's going to happen, Monica. Vivian can stay at your place as long as she wants, but she's not going to hide behind you. She made adult choices, and she's going to face adult consequences. No victim narrative, no blame shifting, no rewriting history to make her the hero of this story. You're being unreasonable. I'm being realistic. 18 years of marriage doesn't disappear because your friend wanted to feel young again. She chose to create Michelle. She chose to lie to me, to Casey, to everyone who trusted her. Those choices have consequences, and I'm going to make sure she faces every single one of them. I stood to leave, then turned back. Oh, and Monica, if I find out you helped her hide money or assets, or if you're coaching her on how to manipulate the divorce proceedings, I'll make sure your firm knows exactly what kind of legal advice you've been giving. I doubt they'd appreciate having a paralegal who helps clients commit fraud. Her face went white. That's not what happened. Then you won't have anything to worry about. I left her sitting there, probably already composing the phone call that would warn Vivian her support system was crumbling. Good. It was time for Michelle to learn that actions had consequences, and Vivian was about to get a master class in reality. The afternoon brought another surprise, a call from Brandon Hartley himself. His voice was smooth and confident, the kind of tone that had probably convinced juries and seduced married women in equal measure. "Mr. Crawford, this is Brandon Hartley. I think we need to discuss our mutual situation." "Do we?" "I believe we can handle this matter like gentlemen, without unnecessary drama or publicity that might hurt our families." "Interesting perspective. Tell me, Brandon, does your wife Lila know about your gentlemanly behavior with Michelle?" The silence stretched long enough for me to enjoy it. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding is yours. You thought you could screw my wife without consequences. You thought Michelle was some single woman with no connections, no family, no husband who might object to your Wednesday night yoga sessions. Mr. Crawford, I want you to know that you never intended to get caught. There's a difference." I let that sink in for a moment. "Here's what's going to happen, Brandon. You're going to end all contact with Michelle, Vivian, or whatever name she's using this week. You're going to pray that your wife doesn't find out about your extracurricular activities. And you're going to hope that I decide your career isn't worth destroying over this. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. Michelle's fantasy is over. Time for everyone to return to their real lives and face their real consequences." I hung up before he could respond. 2 down, and the day was still young. The evening brought the most satisfying development yet. Vivian showed up at the house, her eyes red from crying, her usual composure completely shattered. "We need to talk," she said, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure she was welcome in her own home. "We tried that yesterday. You ran away instead. I needed time to think." "And what did you decide?" She came into the living room but didn't sit down, pacing instead like a caged animal. "This is all getting out of hand. Brandon called me, terrified you're going to ruin his career. Monica thinks you're having some kind of breakdown. Casey won't even answer my calls." "Consequences, Vivian. They tend to pile up when you live a double life. I made mistakes. You made choices. 8 months of deliberate, calculated choices. There's a difference." She finally stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "What do you want?" "I want Michelle to disappear. Completely. I want you to face what you've done to our family. And I want you to understand that the woman who created that fake life doesn't get to dictate the terms of our divorce." "Our divorce?" Her voice cracked on the words. "Did you think we were going to work this out? Hold hands and pretend Michelle never existed? I hoped. You hoped you could have both lives. Keep Michelle for excitement and Vivian for security. But that's not how reality works." She sank into the chair, finally understanding that her fantasy was truly over. "What happens now?" "Now you call your lawyer, not Brandon, and we divide 18 years of marriage. You figure out how to explain to Casey why her mother preferred being someone else. And you live with the fact that everyone who trusted you now knows exactly who you really are." "Bennett, please." "Please what? Please let you keep lying. Please pretend Michelle's affairs don't matter. Please protect you from the consequences of your own choices." I shook my head. "Michelle wanted a new life, Vivian. Congratulations. You got one." 3 days later, Vivian's carefully constructed world began to implode in spectacular fashion. It started with a phone call from her law firm's managing partner, a conversation that lasted exactly 4 minutes and ended with Vivian staring at her phone like it had just delivered news of her own demise. "They want to see me first thing Monday morning," she said, her voice hollow. "Full partnership review." We were sitting in our kitchen, neutral territory for what had become a series of increasingly tense negotiations about the practical aspects of dismantling a marriage. Casey was at school, sparing her the daily spectacle of her parents discussing asset division like they were liquidating a failed business. "What triggered the review?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Someone sent them screenshots. Michelle's dating profiles, messages, photos from hotel rooms. Her hands shook as she set down her coffee cup. "They're calling it a reputational risk assessment." "Any idea who might have done that?" She looked at me with a mixture of accusation and despair. "You tell me." I shrugged. Could have been anyone. Brandon, maybe, trying to cover his own tracks, or one of Michelle's other boyfriends. When you live a double life, you never know who's watching. The truth was more complicated. I hadn't sent anything to her firm directly, but I'd made sure the evidence was available to anyone who cared to look. A few strategic social media posts, some carefully placed comments on professional networking sites, and the kind of digital breadcrumbs that led curious minds exactly where I wanted them to go. Modern reputation destruction didn't require dramatic confrontations or public scenes. It just required patience and an understanding of how information traveled in our hyper-connected world. "They could fire me," Vivian whispered. "They could. Probably will, actually. Law firms don't like partners whose personal lives become public entertainment." "You're enjoying this." I considered that accusation carefully. Was I enjoying watching my wife's career crumble? Was there satisfaction in seeing Michelle's consequences finally catch up with Vivian's real life? "I'm not enjoying it," I said finally. "But I'm not sorry about it either. You made choices, Vivian. This is what those choices cost." She buried her face in her hands. "I never meant for it to go this far." "What did you mean for? How was this supposed to end?" "I don't know. I felt like I was disappearing, like I was becoming invisible in my own life." "So you created Michelle to feel visible again?" "Yes." "And Michelle was everything Vivian couldn't be. Single, childless, free." "Yes." "Which means everything Vivian was, married, a mother, committed, was something Michelle needed to escape from." She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "It wasn't about you. It wasn't about Casey. It was exactly about us. We were the inconvenient truths that Michelle had to erase to exist." The conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Through the front window, I could see a woman I didn't recognize. Tall, blonde, expensively dressed, with a kind of controlled fury that suggested she was here for more than a social call. "Are you expecting someone?" Vivian asked. "No, but I have a feeling I know who that is." I opened the door to find Lila Hartley, Brandon's wife, holding a tablet and wearing an expression that could have melted steel. "Mr. Crawford, I'm Lila Hartley. I believe you know my husband." "I know of him. Please come in." Vivian had gone pale at the introduction, but she stood as Lila entered the living room. The two women studied each other like boxers sizing up their opponent before the first round. "Mrs. Crawford," Lila said, her voice dripping with false courtesy. "Or should I say Michelle? I understand you've been quite busy lately." "I don't know what you mean." Lila held up her tablet, showing Michelle's dating profile. "Really? Because this looks exactly like you. Same face, same smile, different life story." The silence stretched uncomfortably before Lila continued. "My husband confessed everything yesterday. 8 months of hotels, restaurants, weekend trips. 8 months of lying to me while he played house with your alter ego." "I'm sorry," Vivian whispered. "You never meant to get caught. There's a difference." Lila's composure was impressive, but I could see the rage burning just beneath the surface. "Do you have any idea what you've done to my family? Your husband made his own choices. My husband is an idiot. But you, Michelle, you're a predator. You created a fake identity specifically to target married men. You made yourself into exactly what they thought they were missing at home." Lila turned to me. "How long did you know?" "I found out 4 days ago." "And you've been handling this how?" "By making sure everyone understands the real cost of Michelle's fantasy." She nodded approvingly. "Good, because I'm about to make sure the cost gets much higher." Lila turned back to Vivian, who had shrunk into her chair like she was trying to disappear. "Here's what's going to happen, Michelle. You're going to delete every online profile, close every fake account, and disappear from the internet completely. You're going to write a letter to my husband explaining that your relationship was based on lies and manipulation. And you're going to pray that I don't decide to share your story with every law firm, social club, and parent group in this city. You can't. I can do whatever I want. You see, unlike Michelle, I don't have a secret life to protect. I don't have a double identity that can be exposed. I'm just a woman whose husband was seduced by a liar, and I have every right to make sure other wives know what they're dealing with." Lila stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Oh, and Vivian, if I ever see Michelle again, online, in person, or even in someone else's story, I'll make sure your daughter knows exactly what kind of woman her mother really is." The threat hit home. Vivian's face crumpled completely, and for the first time since this whole mess began, I almost felt sorry for her. After Lila left, Vivian sat in stunned silence for nearly 10 minutes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "She's going to destroy me. She's going to expose you. There's a difference. My career, my reputation, my relationship with Casey, everything's gone. Everything Michelle stole from them is being returned. That's not destruction, Vivian. That's justice." She looked at me with something approaching hatred. "You orchestrated this. You set me up." I documented what you did and let the truth speak for itself. If that feels like being set up, maybe the problem isn't my methods. You could have talked to me. We could have worked through this privately. Could we? Because when I tried to talk to you, you ran to Monica's house and started planning your defense strategy. She had no answer for that, because we both knew it was true. Given the choice between facing consequences and finding new ways to avoid them, Vivian had chosen avoidance every time. What do you want from me? She asked finally. I want you to understand what you destroyed. Not just our marriage, but Casey's faith in family, my ability to trust anyone, your own integrity. I want you to face the fact that Michelle wasn't an escape from your real life. She was theft from it. And then what? After I understand, after I face everything, what happens then? I looked at the woman I'd been married to for 18 years, the mother of my daughter, the person who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my daily routines. She was still beautiful, still intelligent, still capable of commanding a room when she chose to, but she was also a stranger who'd been living in my house, eating my food, and planning her escape from everything we'd built together. Then you figure out how to live with who you really are, I said. Not Michelle, not the fantasy version of yourself, but Vivian Crawford, the woman who chose to blow up her family for 8 months of hotel room adventures. She flinched at the description, but didn't argue with its accuracy. And us? She whispered. There is no us. There's you, and there's me, and there's Casey, and there's the legal process of dividing what's left of 18 years. But us? Michelle ended that the day she decided we were too boring for her fantasy life. The finality of those words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She doubled over slightly, as if the reality of what she'd lost was finally truly sinking in. I'm sorry, she said, and for the first time it sounded genuine. I know you are, but sorry doesn't rebuild trust, and it doesn't resurrect marriages. Sorry is just the price of admission to whatever comes next. What comes next? You tell me. You're the one who wanted a new life. Now you get to figure out what that looks like when it's not built on lies. She sat there for a long time, staring at her hands, probably trying to imagine a future where she was neither Michelle nor the old version of Vivian, where she was just a divorced woman in her 40s, starting over with a damaged reputation and a daughter who'd lost faith in her. It wasn't a pretty picture, but it was an honest one. And honesty, I was learning, was the only foundation worth building on. The partnership review meeting lasted exactly 23 minutes. Vivian came home afterward looking like she'd been hit by a truck, her professional composure finally and completely shattered. They gave me 2 options, she said, slumping into the kitchen chair like a marionette with cut strings. Resign quietly with a neutral reference, or face a formal disciplinary hearing that would make everything public record. Which did you choose? What do you think? Her laugh was bitter and hollow. I resigned. 18 years of building my career, and it's over because of 8 months of stupidity. I felt a flicker of something that might have been sympathy, but it died quickly. It's over because of 8 months of choices. Michelle didn't make herself. I know that. She rubbed her temples like she was trying to massage away a headache that had taken up permanent residence. The managing partner said someone had been very thorough in documenting my extracurricular activities. Screenshots, dates, locations, even credit card records. They knew everything. Thorough documentation tends to happen when you live a double life in the digital age. She looked at me with exhausted resignation. It was you, wasn't it? You didn't just stumble across Michelle's phone. You've been planning this. I've been responding to it. There's a difference. Is there? Because it feels like you've been 3 steps ahead of me this entire time. I considered that accusation. Had I been planning her destruction, or just ensuring that her choices had appropriate consequences? The line between justice and revenge was thinner than I'd expected. You created Michelle, I said finally. I just made sure she couldn't hide from Vivian forever. The conversation was interrupted by Casey coming home from school, her backpack hitting the floor with the kind of theatrical emphasis that only teenagers could manage. She took one look at her mother's defeated posture and sighed. Let me guess. The job thing didn't go well. How did you... Vivian started. Mom? Everyone at school knows. Emma Hartley's been telling anyone who'll listen that her stepmom caught her dad cheating with some married woman who was pretending to be single online. Casey grabbed a soda from the refrigerator with practiced efficiency. Took me about 5 seconds to connect the dots. Vivian's face went white. Emma knows? Emma knows. Her friends know. Their parents know. It's like a really boring version of a reality show, except everyone's talking about it. What are they saying? Casey studied her mother with the kind of clinical detachment that was either very mature or completely heartless. That you're pathetic. that Dad deserves better, that I'm probably messed up because of your issues. She air quoted the last word with particular venom. Casey, I can explain. Can you? Because I'd love to hear the explanation for why my mother decided to cosplay as a single woman for 8 months. The silence stretched uncomfortably before Casey continued. You know what the worst part is? It's not even that you cheated. It's that you were so desperate to escape being my mom that you created an entire fake identity without me in it. Vivian's composure finally cracked completely. That's not true. I love you more than anything. You love the idea of me. But Michelle loved the idea of not having me at all. Casey's voice was steady, but I could see the pain underneath the anger. Do you have any idea what it feels like to find out your mother's fantasy life is one where you don't exist? You never meant for me to find out. There's a difference. Casey grabbed her backpack and headed for the stairs. I'm staying at Dad's when you two figure out the divorce stuff. At least he never pretended I was someone else's problem. The sound of her bedroom door closing echoed through the house like a gunshot. Vivian sat in the silence that followed, tears streaming down her face. She hates me. She's hurt and disappointed, and probably confused about why her mother needed to become someone else to feel happy. I didn't mean for it to affect her. Everything affects her, Vivian. She's 17 years old, and her world just got turned upside down because her mother decided to live a double life. Of course it affects her. What do I do? You figure out how to be the mother she deserves instead of the woman Michelle wanted to be. The next few days brought a cascade of consequences that even I hadn't fully anticipated. Vivian's resignation from the law firm made the legal community gossip circuit within hours. Her absence from Casey's school events was noted and discussed. The story of Michelle's double life spread through our suburban social network like a virus, mutating and growing with each retelling. Brandon Hartley, meanwhile, was dealing with his own reckoning. Leila had filed for divorce and was apparently documenting every asset, every lie, and every hotel receipt with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant. His law firm was conducting its own review, and the whispers about his poor judgment were getting louder. Monica, Vivian's loyal friend and enabler, had gone conspicuously quiet. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing her at a coffee shop, looking haggard and constantly checking her phone like she was expecting bad news. The whole ecosystem of lies and secrets that had supported Michelle's existence was collapsing, and everyone who'd been part of it was scrambling to minimize their own damage. I should have felt vindicated. Justice served, truth revealed, consequences appropriately distributed. But mostly I just felt tired. The house felt different now, emptier, but also cleaner, like we'd finally aired out rooms that had been sealed shut for years. Casey and I developed new routines that didn't include accommodating Vivian's mysterious schedule or pretending her mood swings were normal. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Vivian showed up with a suitcase and a formal-looking envelope. Divorce papers, she said, setting the envelope on the coffee table like it might explode. I had a lawyer draw them up. Fair division of assets, joint custody of Casey, no alimony. I looked at the woman I'd been married to for 18 years. She'd lost weight, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a month ago. She looked older, sadder, but also somehow more real than she had in years. No alimony? I destroyed this marriage. I don't get to profit from cleaning up the mess. It was the first completely honest thing she'd said since this whole nightmare began. What's your plan? Start over, find a new job, probably in a different city, try to rebuild some kind of relationship with Casey, if she'll let me. And Michelle? Michelle's gone. All the profiles deleted, all the accounts closed. She was never real anyway. I picked up the envelope but didn't open it. For what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this. Are you? Because sometimes it feels like you enjoyed watching me fall apart. I considered that accusation carefully. I enjoyed seeing the truth come out. I enjoyed watching consequences finally catch up with choices, but I didn't enjoy watching you destroy yourself. Even after everything I did? Even then. You're still Casey's mother. You're still the woman I loved for most of my adult life. The fact that you chose to become someone else doesn't erase the history we had. She nodded, tears starting again. I know I don't have the right to ask, but do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me? I don't know. Ask me in a year when the dust settles and we can see what's left. And Casey? Casey's 17. She'll make her own decisions about forgiveness. Vivian picked up her suitcase and headed for the door. At the threshold, she turned back one last time. For what it's worth, Bennett, you deserved better than Michelle. You deserved better than the woman I became. I deserved honesty. We all did. She nodded and walked out into the evening, leaving behind 18 years of marriage and 8 months of lies. I sat in the quiet house, holding divorce papers and listening to Casey's music drifting down from upstairs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new routines, new ways of being a family of 2 instead of 3. But tonight, for the first time in months, the house felt honest. No secret phones buzzing in gym bags, no mysterious late meetings, no double lives hiding in the shadows. Michelle was gone, Vivian was facing her consequences, and the rest of us were free to figure out who we really were when we weren't accommodating someone else's fantasy. It wasn't the ending I'd planned when I married Vivian Crawford 18 years ago, but it was real, and after months of living with lies, reality felt like a gift. I opened the divorce papers and began